not on purpose.
Okay, well, you should be able to mute them. So I've asked Gina to get us some more pamphlets.
During the meeting?
She'll later, not today.
Oh,
I
okay.
asked her during the meeting.
Whoa, what is Trevor doing? Okay.
So just
All right,
letting you know.
sounds
We can
good.
talk
Okay.
later.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, I can't, can you see my slides? I'm gonna have to,
Yes, you can see your slides. This is what's showing on Zoom.
yeah, but now I can't.
Hold on. Hold on. There.
Ah. Okay, and is it popping up there? All right. Hey, Carol. It's working. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Well, welcome, everyone. We're going to get started. Okay, so welcome to our May 2022 STS meeting. We have about 20 folks online, or those who registered, as well as about 40 in the audience tonight. So we appreciate everyone being here. My name is Julie White. I'm your chair for 2022. It's my privilege to be a part of the largest local section in the world. Typically a year, we have between 600 and 800 members, and over 3,000 chemical engineers are eligible for membership in the greater Houston area. So tonight, we're talking about the Energy Forum, which we just had, Decarbonizing Process Industries 3. Again, thank you, TEEP, U of H Energy, SECO, and certainly Alan Rossiter and his team for coordinating. You know, this is our third year on that topic, but this year we focused on electric motors as a key component of electrification and two different types of processes for the carbon capture, ethylene production and power generation. So I'd like to give a shout out to Steve Barras with Synchronous Motors of ABB. The topic that he presented on was using large electric motor technology to help industry move toward greater decarbonization. If we could give a round of applause for Steve, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. And Joel, I'm going to butcher your name, Guillaume, the Director of Ethylene Technology with Technip, is overview of carbon capture methods in the petrochemical and refining industry. I'd like to give a round of applause for him for CO2 capture. Thank you. And David Lewecki as Program Director of Net Power Commercial Projects with McDermott and the Alum FedVet cycle, generate power with no CO2 emissions. So thank you, a round of applause. And our gold sponsors, I'd like for you just to stand up for us. You have actually been a part of our water forum and our energy forum. And so SPX, if you could, Todd, thank you for it. Appreciate your continued sponsorship at so many of our meetings. And so, thank you. And so Todd is part of For-It Plasma, and FPL was formed in 2006. The IP portfolio is greater than 120 worldwide patents, and For-It Plasma is a continuous sponsor of ours. We're very grateful. The motto is Mars or Bust, which is so fitting for Houston. So thank you. And FPL focuses on electric decarbonization solutions for water splitting, gas cracking, induction heating and melting, and supersonic hydrogen combustion. Thank you. And I'd also like to give a round of appreciation to SPX Technologies, Cooling Technologies. Can you raise your hand so we know where to clap? Oh, no. Okay, yes, okay. So we'll get him later. But SPS Cooling Technologies is a leading global manufacturer of cooling towers, evaporative fluid coolers, evaporative condensers, and air-cooled heat exchangers. For a century, they have provided exceptional quality equipment and service to HVAC, process cooling, industrial, and refrigeration markets with more than 150 offices, subsidiaries, partners worldwide. They have a global reach and local services necessary to deliver solutions for their customers. So thank you to SPX. They were both a water and energy forum sponsor, and we appreciate it. Thank you. So a couple announcements will look familiar to past ones, but I would like to make sure that our extended STS membership and guests are aware of our programs. We did conduct a membership survey about a year ago, and the basis of our programming topics for 2022 is based on the results of that survey. And so you'll see everything from plant operations to energy sector topics to specific advancements in process safety, sustainability, hydrogen, and so forth. 37% of our members, or those who actually replied to the survey, are part of the downstream and plant operations sectors, and about 25% are part of E&C. And so we're providing a hybrid meeting in order to combat or counter some of those barriers of attendance, which is schedule and timing. And so we saw that it was about a 2-to-1 ratio of those who prefer in person to those who would like to keep up the online or hybrid meeting. And so that's why we're offering that. And you see that in our numbers actually for this meeting. Typically about 15 to 20 members continuously watch online. They may be traveling or they may be further out in our 28.5 counties that make up our largest section here. So we're pleased to offer that, as well as an opportunity for networking and great food. And we have had great response to our STS local section membership. So typically you can renew that at the same time of the national membership, but we're also offering, with the permission of national, through our bylaws, the same program that's offered for local sections elsewhere. Our price point is $25 a year. With the intent to join national within a 2-year period. And we actually have a number of folks who have joined that way. And so that allows you the programming opportunities that are available through the South Texas section at a very reasonable price. I'd like to give a shout out, and so for those who sponsored or who actually were volunteers, rather, at the Reach for the Stars event on April 9th at Rice University, I'd like to give a round of applause to Matt Kolodny. So thank you, Matt. So we had a number of volunteers. It was a huge hit, and we will have an article in our newsletter. And so it beat out the competition. And so our Prairie View A&M professor, Merlin, was able to win over, let's see, was it Haagen-Dazs or Ben & Jerry's and Blue Bell?
Formally, but I said it tasted as good as personally, I thought it tasted as good as Ben & Jerry's.
So based on our palettes from chemical engineering expert, beautiful son of Houston, we believe that the Prairie View A&M professor's ice cream beat out even Bluebell, which is a big deal. So, because I grew up eating Bluebell. So, but I would like to give a shout out to those volunteers. So from a standpoint of networking for job opportunities, SPE, it's their 5th year that they've invited us and so many other groups. And so that was hosted this past April. And just know that we sent a number of YPs there and really do appreciate them inviting us continuously for the event. Speaking of YPs, I would like Trevor Rice to give him a round of applause. And while he's not in person, Rom and Coral Smith. So, thank you. So STS YPs were part of the Goodie or Appreciation Bags for Teachers. We've been doing this a number of years, and the teachers do appreciate, and it's an opportunity for us to communicate about chemical engineering. Okay, and so thank you also to the STS members and friends who volunteered this week. We actually do receive like a stipend amount for our volunteers to volunteer on our behalf, and so we appreciate you doing that. And of course, in exchange for that, you're able to participate in the OTC. And so here are the names of folks who participated, and we do appreciate that. And I'd like to give a round of applause to Tom and to those who so often volunteer. Thank you. John Middleton. So a long list right there. Thank you. And thank you, John. You're also there. Okay. And this is one of the most impressive things in the history of the South Texas section. For many years, STS is known for their PE chemical engineering preparation course. And I will tell you that is why I passed. I think I say that every month. But Dale Embry, Carol Schmidt, and then all of our volunteers, it's truly a great group of instructors and curriculum. And this year we have 9 students. And while it has shifted to more of an online course, we have instructors who are adapting, who are so accustomed to the face-to-face feedback from students, you know, who have some students in the room, but most students online. And that has expanded the opportunity for those to prepare for now the online or electronic sort of based PE exam. And I just want to give a shout out to the continuous service that they offer, and we will likely do this again in 2023. So thank you. Carol, thank you. The STS AICHE Awards, the Best Paper Committee is long-standing, and I'd just like to recognize Matt, Tom, and Ryan. The paperwork begins, so to speak, and the reviews for them now that the deadline has passed for May 1st. And it's always just a tremendous opportunity to recognize the technical accomplishments of our members. So thank you very much. So also, we have a number of service awards, and this is a year for so many. I won't go through the whole list, but it varies from distinguished service to special service to lifetime to different recognitions to potentially even an ECHOLM award, which is given out every 4 years. And so there's just a number of opportunities for recognition of our members in such a timely year as 2021, awarded in 2022. So I want to thank the awards committee. Tom Min leads that. The executive committee, that's the 5 officers and 4 directors. Our young members committee, and the 3 chairs committee is essentially a past chair, current chair, chair-elect. And there's just different awards that are selected based on the nominations from certain subcommittees, but also members as well. And so that deadline was May 1st, but you'll be seeing how these service awards are recognized. And please be mindful of that for next year as well. We take all incoming input and gladly do so. Our nominating committee it begins in May, and I'd just like to give a shout out that it's led by our past chair, Ramanan Krishnamurti. And the positions that are up for next year, our chair-elect, which is always up, it's a 3-year term, treasurer, and our director positions 1 and 3. And so if you're interested in running for any of those, please reach out to the nominating committee. they certainly will take input, even if it's your own. So we appreciate that. So now, speaking of committees, there's a volunteering committee interest by so many, and I'm grateful that particularly at this meeting, that there have been a number of folks who have wanted to get engaged. And so if you're online or if you are in person, please see me. I can network you in with the right chair lead, or committee lead rather, so that you can have more information about various committees. If you're interested in one time, a lot of the K through 12 work was already completed with the Reach for the Stars STEM outreach and the K through 12. That happens typically the first semester, so to speak, of the year. But we do have more that can come available with Boy Scout programs and various things, and Matt Klodny is shaking his head right now, yes. And so please see him if you're interested in those opportunities as they present themselves. They will also be on our website. For our volunteering, one of the biggest things that we do is the Southwest Process Technology Conference, which is originally a locally run and started conference. It had been in Galveston at Moody Gardens, and then it switched recently, in the last few years, to Sugar Land Marriott. And Alan has been a part of that organization and leadership for 10 plus years now, right? And so we just want, if you're interested in volunteering, please reach out to Alan or myself. Essentially, the in-person volunteering for just coordinating and hosting are the last 2 days of September. And then if you're interested in a fun event like arrangements, please let us know. There's so much to do, and we can always use the support. If you'd like to get more engaged with the chapter and you're thinking of running for office one day, the Bylaws and Governance Committee, that may seem a little dry. It should be run from a governance standpoint. And so you can always be on that committee, and then the next step, run for office. Sponsorships, we'll be kicking that back up. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Making the off, probably in the summertime to prepare for restarting more of a streamlined sponsorship. We have the awards committee and, of course, the very fun and well-participated K through 12 outreach that Matt Kolodny leads. So a couple things. You may see that we are trying to get the word out on our meetings because we can do all of this planning, right? I mean, treasurer is a huge job. There's all these big jobs. Unless you actually get the word out, you don't really know what's going on with the chapter. And so we do have one of the best we've ever had for webmaster and communications director, but we're also looking for our social media team members and the YP group to help us get the word out through LinkedIn and other avenues. And then our IT manager, we actually kicked off what would be our MS Teams format, and that helps us with file management and communication management. And there's some help that we can use there, but know that we're having on our own without an IT person as a bunch of chemical engineers. So we just need a little bit of help, not major help. So spread the word. Okay, and I'd like to change from speaker to Dennis Griffith. Dennis Griffith is our position 4 elected office for HR, but one of the things that he does for fun for us is the Sam Houston Port of Houston tour. Dennis, take it away.
Thank you, Julie. Well, the first time I actually went on, it wasn't this boat, on a tour was back in 1966 when I was in high school. Many of y'all have joined us every year since who knows when, not much after that, on the annual South Texas Section Houston Ship Channel tour. And it, gives you a real appreciation of the backyards of the refineries and the petrochemical complexes. And we had to cancel, or actually, quote, postpone our tour back in 2020 at the outbreak of the COVID pandemic. A lot of stuff got canceled. The spring national meeting got canceled then, everything. So just about a month ago, I found out that the Port of Houston is restarting the tours, and we are among the first groups that will be going on a tour. There's been a few changes. Normally, we would go out on a Saturday evening. Unfortunately, they're still not doing Saturdays and Sundays, but we are going on Friday evening. Is that the 3rd? Yes, June the 3rd. Because traffic is kind of a mess, even though we set sail at 6 o'clock, we're really asking everybody to shoot to be there at 5:30. After all, this is a weekday, a work day, and there's some construction, I understand, and some bad traffic. So, please come early. The other major change in the tour is they've cut back the number of people that are allowed on board the Sam Houston. We were usually running about 6, and of course, this will be on a first come, first serve. One thing, if you remember, we were charging a $10 fee, which was refunded when you came to the tour, just to ensure you did do. We decided we're not going to do that this year, so you don't have to pay in advance. But we do encourage you to show up because we are, like I say, limited to only 50 people. And so if you sign up and then don't go, you're really hurting somebody who really wanted to go, but it was number 51. There is a link. There is an article on the South Texas Section's website and a link to signing up for the tour. So it's active. Is there anything else? Or that's the last slide?
Just that it is free.
Yeah, it's free, again, but you do have to go up and sign up. Of course, there's the usual restrictions, photo ID and things like that to get into the port. Any questions? All right, well, I hope to see you all on board on Friday evening, the 3rd of June. All right.
Okay. Thank you, Dennis. So from a standpoint of our next topic, we are just real privileged during OTC week to have AICHE represent a brief introduction of our brief speaker, Dr. Anil Gokul. I have had the privilege of there's a software called Chef and RAST, R-A-S-T, that CCPS was able to agree to manage with a donation of Dow, and I just took a class. It was exceptional, and I know that there's so many other CCPS initiatives, and so slides. We'll also take questions afterwards from the audience as well as the online chat, so I'd like to give a proper introduction to Dr. Gokul. He has more than 30 years of experience in engineering, process safety, and process automation, overseeing large projects in groups. So he is part of the CCPS staff consultants. He's specifically the senior director of CCPS AICHE, who provides mission goals, objectives, and strategy for CCPS as the senior vice president. And then he previously worked for companies including Siemens, Honeywell, Rockwell Automation, and Raytheon. His experience is in operations, engineering, technology, product development for chemicals, petroleum, and petrochemicals. He has been part of API 520, 521 committees. He's published in oil and gas testing. He's presented on many lectures, including at the National Petrochemical and Refiners Association. He's presented at ISA, which is, quite frankly, pretty prestigious in my opinion. And he also has a chemical engineering degree from University of Mumbai and his doctorate from Oklahoma State and is a PE in Texas. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Gokul.
There all this. So thank you for inviting me, Julie. I wasn't planning on speaking in a STS member long time ago, and back when the meetings were in the Houston Engineering Center on West Hamber. Some of you actually remember that. But so I've been around, and I was pleasantly surprised to see some of the faces that I have known since the late 80s and early 90s. Some I have actually worked with, and some I have known through the AICHE activities. So glad to be here. What I want to talk about today is what is CCPS, Center for Chemical Process Safety. Some of you have heard of it, some of you have not even known about. So one thing to begin with, CCPS stands for Center for Chemical Process Safety. By definition, we focus only on process safety. That's our single point mission within AICHE, right? So how did that come about? All right, now which slide are you seeing? Should I introduce myself? No, I think she already did that, so I'm going to skip talking about me. Enough. Uh, Back in the 80s, some of you remember what happened in Bhopal, India, right? How many of you know that? Raise your hand. All right. So at that point, the industry actually came to ASCHE and said, this is not right. We need to figure out how are we going to tackle the issues of process safety. So a bunch of leading companies in the US and otherwise came to ASCHE leadership in New York and said, we need to do something. Let's get together a group. That was the birth of CCPS. And in the 1985 spring meeting here in Houston, the formation of CCPS was announced. And actually was there at that meeting. I was looking for a job at that time. I remember that. So that's how CCPS and the next Piper Alpha and so on. How do you get around that? What type of protocols do you put together? Again, everything about process safety. That was a single point focus of what CCPS was formed for. Recently, we looked at our vision as to what is it all about and changed it a little bit to make it succinct and easy to remember. If you ask me tomorrow, what is the vision of CCPS, I can tell you that without thinking about it. A world without process safety incidents. That's what we want to achieve. That's it. How do you get there? So we put together a mission to actually drive towards that visionary idea that we want to work on. And some of the things that we recognize that we, as CCPS, part of ASCHE, we really don't do many of the things our member companies do. We don't manufacture things. We are not a refinery. We are not an upstream process facility. We are not an ethylene plant. We are a bunch of staffers within ASCHE. So what we are doing is help the industry and help our member companies to distribute the knowledge about process safety. Act as their worldwide resource. That's what we are going to do. Advance the concept of process safety culture, the technical concepts and the management practices from process safety perspective. That's what we will do. The concept of competency is very muddled to many people, and we want to advance the individual and organizational process safety competency. Competency is not learning. Competency is not knowledge. Competency is the ability and experience of putting your knowledge to use. So it is very different than just having a knowledge or having a book that tells you what to do. We want to advance competency in the industry as well as individuals. Collaboration across the organization, we will try to drive. And last but not the least, push the message that process safety is a key societal value and is a fundamental need for a sustainable operation. There is a lot of discussion these days about sustainability, but I guarantee you there is no sustainability. And that's a premise that is critical to having a successful process safety operation. So that's why we are promoting process safety, and that's what we are focused on. Okay, so who are the member companies? CCPS is not an individual membership organization like ASCHE is. CCPS has member companies because that's how we were formed. And you look at the logos of 232 member companies that are working with us actively. And so unfortunately, some of the small print is impossible to read, but if your company is a member and your logo is not here, please raise your hand because that's something that we need to fix. I know I met one person here, I think Ascend Performance Material is a member, and so there you go. There are more than one members present here. So thank you for your support to CCPS as part of your membership. So that's the global presence that we have in all continents except Antarctica. We don't have anybody there yet. Who are these members? What do they do? Our biggest group is in chemicals, fine chemicals, refining, and upstream oil and gas. So that's our core strength, is the chemicals. That's where it started. And then we have branched out to steel, mining, and metals, pharma. Pharmaceutical companies actually, the medicines that we take typically tend to be actually fine chemicals, complex fine chemicals, but they are still chemicals, and they have significant process safety needs also. Food production, fertilizers, we all know about what happened in Beirut recently. Those kinds of things have happened over the world around many, many times, and that's agrochemicals, if you will. We are getting more and more interest in the big data and artificial intelligence. How do you leverage those technologies to apply to process safety? So we have some companies that are working with us in that regard also. We also have some consulting and engineering firms that are members. Government agencies, the California agency, for example, and some others are also. New Jersey Department of, I think, NJDEP, that's the acronym, and I'll remember that eventually. So there are some government agencies who are also members, and they work with us in preventing the process safety incidents also. So there's a wide variety of membership, even though the top hexagon is where the most members are. What do we do? What do we do for these? Obviously, as you saw in this slide, the level of sophistication of process safety for these companies varies widely, right? So what we try to do is, for those who are advanced practitioners of process safety, we try to raise the bar for them and get them even better. We provide our services and our guidelines. For those who are early in the journey, we help them, we show them the way on how to increase their implementation of process safety, how to reduce their incidences. And we have a global outreach. So this one slide actually covers everything that we do in a very simple form. How do we do that? So here is a bunch of pictures, and I'm not going to read in every one of them because that'll take 10 times more time than Julie told me I have. So I will talk briefly about some things. She mentioned the RAST and chef training that we do. The training the software is free, but the training costs us money to implement, so we charge some fee. But the software you can download and use it if you like for free. We conduct workshops for students at different universities, free to the university. We conduct faculty workshops for educators to train them on how to teach process safety. And we publish books, and some of the books that the one in the middle called Red is famously known as the Red Book. Only 2 people have published the Red Book. The first one was Mao Zedong, and the second is CCPS. There are only 2 famous Red Books in the world. So the RBPS is the famous Red Book now. We are publishing many other books. Over 100 books have been published to provide guidelines for process safety, new concepts, and so on. And we hold regional meetings. We just finished the Global Congress on Process Safety in San Antonio 3 weeks ago, or something like that. So there is a lot of activity in getting the experts together, and sharing the experiences is one of the things that we do a lot, because you want to learn from other people's experiences. You don't, somebody said, learn from, maybe Groucho Marx, I don't remember. Learn from other people's experience, because there is no way you're gonna live long enough to make all the mistakes by yourself. And that's why learning from others is a very critical thing that we do at CCPS. We provide the medium, we provide the means to be able to do that. All right, 3 new books that are coming out now. So human factors has become an important topic these days as a critical factor in improving process safety performance. We have finished this book. Cybersecurity. Cybersecurity today is where process safety was about 25 years ago in terms of sophistication. How do you apply cybersecurity to process industries? A lot of the times it is dominated by IT people who don't understand process engineering, and process safety people, process engineering people don't understand what the IT people are talking about. This book is an attempt to have the process safety and process engineering people understand and take charge of cybersecurity needs by using the techniques and technologies that we have developed over the last 30 years for perfecting process safety implementations. That's the focus of the book. We are not replacing the IT people, but we are finding ways to work much more closely to them for the advantage of process engineering. And the last is the process safety for engineers. This is like a, I guess this is a primer and a guide for young engineers. What's that series called? And the yellow books used to be for experts, something I forgot, but something like that. So it covers a wide range, but it also starts at a very slow pace in explaining what is process safety. So it is useful for a significantly wide, I guess, target audience here. And I am open to questions, time permitting.
I'll just, real last, did it work? Did it work? Yeah. There was a lot of concern a couple of years ago regarding the Chemical Safety Board. Can you make any comments about how things are doing now with the Chemical Safety Board? That's a very broad question.
That's a very broad question, but we, as CCPS, did get involved in that discussion. At one time, there was only one member of the whole board, where we need 5 of the board members there to have it function properly. So we worked with the committee dominated by 2 senators, and we actually went there, and Shaquille gave a presentation and was a witness to that committee to talk about why CSB is important and why it is critical to fill the roles with the people that are qualified to be able to fill those roles and responsibilities. So we actively pushed the government, if you will, by telling them that this is an important body that needs to be staffed properly and funded properly. There were several other challenges with CSB. For many years, the White House tried to zero out their funding, but fortunately, Congress said hell no, and the funding continued at the level that it was before. But now we have a lot more members on the board of CSB, and it's doing much, much better than it did 5, 6 years ago.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Anil. Appreciate that.
Any questions on that?
Was there another question?
No, I was.
No. Okay. There are
Okay.
currently no online questions.
Thank you all.
Okay. I just really want to say thank you both to Gina Gatto, who's here for AICHE. She's a key person for helping us with our local section. We interact often with national, whether it's a simple something like an email address or something more important like a waiver. So we appreciate Gina being really a prompt liaison for us, so thank you for that. And Anil, thank you for speaking on behalf of process safety and leading a group. I know everything behind the scenes that goes on, we don't know, but I will tell you, being a part of the GCPS team, I got to see the fact that American Chemical Council and CCPS are working together on evaluating incident data so that we can decide how to lower that and what plans we have in place for industry. So there's so many important things that support the mission of CCPS. Thank you. I needed to drop the mic. I'm always afraid of feedback. So we will have Victoria Meyer come up in a minute. I will introduce her. What I'm going to do is take us through the end of our slide deck here and then transition to hers, because we have some very interactive Slido type of engagements, and Victoria gives such a great presentation. So what I'm going to do is thank our keynote speaker, even though she hasn't spoken yet. Thank you, Victoria, Dr. Gokul, And our Energy Forum speakers again, Steve Barras, Joe Gliam, and Neil McIntosh. I will share that our next event again is the June 3rd Port of Houston Tour. Again, thank you, Dennis, for organizing that. Our next dinner meeting, we take the summer off. That will be September 1st. That's our keynote speaker will be Dr. Sam Brody. And then we also, he's part of Institute for Disaster Resilient Texas and works with the governor and other networks in order to support the resilience programs across the state of Texas, including the Ike Dike and other things that you've heard about. Really, they reach a number of factors there. Tentatively, pending the signing of our contract, which is a couple months out, but that will be at San Jacinto College, the new CPET building in Pasadena. So that will be our venue on the east side of town. If you were here at the last meeting in April, I also mentioned that will be our December event location, but at their maritime facility, which overlooks the port. It's just beautiful. Of course, September 29th and 30th. So the 29th is the dinner meeting component for the Process Technology Conference. And again, if you'd like to volunteer, please see Alan Rossiter in the middle of the room. So I'd like to say thank you to our officers, and of course, as always, give appreciation to those who work behind the scenes, like Trevor Rice, who is such an important part of our AV team, and Adam and Eureka, who do so much to support our chapter. So thank you for that. And on that note, I will go back and introduce Victoria once I grab my notes from my chair. 1 minute. Maybe in September I'll have it down pat, right? So Victoria Meyer, first I'd like to say that she comes highly recommended by Yasmin McCall, who has heard her speak, who very much knows her, and we are very pleased to support Victoria in her keynote. Victoria is a go-getter. She's a founder and president of Progressio Global and host of the Chemical Show podcast. The Chemical Show podcast is every Tuesday, so look out for it next Tuesday. I've overheard it's a good one. So I'm sure they all are, but this one is, yes. This is the 50th? Yes. 50th podcast is on Tuesday. She's an expert in chemical market strategy and growth. For over 25 years, Victoria helped companies including Shell, LyondellBasell, and Clariant to deliver growth and transformation. Her highlights include leading a turnaround of a $1 billion global business and leading Shell's re-entry into polyethylene with Shell Pennsylvania. Today, she supervises and advises on a number of avenues in energy transition, including with chemical executives to advance breakthrough results in strategy execution and commercial excellence. Victoria holds her Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from Illinois Institute of Technology and an MBA from Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern. She and her husband Todd reside in Spring, Texas with their 4 daughters. Please give a round of applause for Victoria Meyer.
Let's see if this works.
Hold on 1 second.
Testing. We're going to have the same testing issue.
1 second. I need my mouse.
Maybe.
Let's see.
Test.
Oh, see, you got the test. He's got the test going. There we go. He had the magic touch.
However, it's like locked up here. 1 second. I'm going to let Victoria just start with a casual conversation while yours truly unlocks her computer. Sorry about that,
That's
Victoria.
okay. I was going to say, do I have any jokes? I don't have any jokes.
A process engineer across the road. What was on the other side?
Smoke.
Mirrors, congestion and confinement, but thankfully they did it only on paper. I don't know. Dry. I can't promise that I can tell a joke, but I do need Trevor Rice up here for help. I'm sorry, everybody. It is locked solid. Okay, what would you do?
So while they're doing this, this is my first AICHE meeting in like 20 years. So I was telling you at the table, when I was first, early in my career, I was a member of AICHE, and I don't know if I was active. I'm not actually sure. I remember those days. And then I moved into the business, and I really felt like AICHE wasn't necessarily for me, although I also recognize, especially today, that there's a very strong management division. And I rejoined AICHE when I formed my own business for the dental insurance. So it's my true story and everything else that comes along with it. So I'm glad to be here today talking with you about the energy transition, where we are with it, and what it means for the downstream value chain. I am going to attempt to walk and talk with the clicker and a mic, and it may not work, so I may end up back at the other mic just for safety reasons, but we will start that way. So the energy transition. I gotta be honest, when I first heard about this, the energy transition, greenhouse gas, global warming, I wasn't necessarily thrilled. I was not necessarily a believer. And, you know, I wasn't sure that you could convince me that this was what was going to happen. And yet here we are, right? And I think the point of the energy transition, we're not really in debate on it. We are in the midst of the energy transition, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And so what we're going to talk about is where we are, why we're here, and then what it means for the downstream value chain. Let's see if all right, and here's the audience participation part. So you guys are going to get to, I got this lovely invitation introduction from Julie, and I'd like to know a little bit more about you. So pull out your phones. I don't normally tell you to pull out your phones. Pull out your phones, open up a web browser. You may or may not be able to get the QR code to work, or just go to slido.com. and then type in AICHE. And this is going to work for the folks who are at home too. We'll give folks a second to get connected. All right. And I'm going to come up with the first, people are already answering questions. So, easy one. What's your role? Where do you fall into this energy and downstream value chain? Engineering, R&D, business, manufacturing, supply and logistics, retired. Do we have any retired folks or any students? There seems to be, all right, awesome. There seems to be more gray hair than college hairs. I guess we'll say that. A lot of engineering, so a lot of technical folks. Awesome. So where do you stand on this? Next question is, I'm concerned about the effect the energy transition will have on my career. 5 means a lot. 3 is a little bit, and 1 is not concerned at all. All right, and it's going to move around on us, which is fun. Kind of people more towards the not so worried. It may be partially the age in the room, let's be honest about that, but less worried than more worried about it, right? In terms of what the energy transition is going to do to our careers. Next question. I believe the energy transition is a value creator. So 5 means, yeah, lots of value created. 3 so-so, 1 not at all. Okay, it's a mixed crew, somewhere in the middle. Maybe, that sounds like a maybe. And last question is, percentage of time you individually are involved in something related to the energy transition, whether it be as a business, whether it be a project, whether it be something else. In your role, what do you do with the energy transition? So we've got a fair amount of people that are doing things that are energy transition related. Most people are not, and that's okay. All right, so that's helpful. So this kind of tells me where you guys are. I'm actually switching back to the other mic because this is going to make me crazy. I'm going to move over here. And I'm going to run it off of this and we'll see how it goes. Am I good to, except I'm going to knock the mic off. All right, we'll leave it as is. Okay, you adjust. Perfect. So I know a little bit about you. You now know a little bit about me, and Julie already introduced me. I started out my career doing project engineering, and in fact, even before then, I did process engineering when I was a co-op at UOP, working in pilot plants and hearing a lot about process technology and where it was going to go. But for me, it was I had a vision on the future and on being in the business, making decisions, not at the engineering and manufacturing and executing decisions. So, I started there, went through 25 years at, Fortune 50 and global companies, including Shell and Clariant, and then moved into my own business where I advise large and mid-sized companies on strategy and other related things. Early in my career, I read the book Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen. Have you guys ever heard of it? Anyone? Right? And it struck me, and it has stayed with me for 20 years since I read that book. And the Innovator's Dilemma, the premise of it is creative destruction. You have to be innovative. We have to move ahead as a company, as an industry. To be content puts you at risk. And there are examples, right? So they talk about, in that book, he talks about the Swiss watchmakers. So Swiss watches, intricate, detailed, very effective. The Swiss developed the digital watch and decided not to pursue it. So the Japanese did. They took the technology, they progressed into digital watches, and it almost wiped out the Swiss watch industry. The innovation was there, they didn't believe it, and they put themselves at risk by not taking advantage of it. Blockbuster's another great one we always hear about, right? I mean, I loved going to the local Blockbuster, $5, get a movie for the whole weekend, stick that big fat tape in my VCR and return it whenever. Netflix came along, and then remember, Netflix was originally a mail order service for movies. You put your list of 30 movies that you wanted. When they showed up, when it became available, they would send it to you. You could keep it as long as you want, and you send it back. Blockbuster said, I'm not worried about that. Well, how many of you guys have a Blockbuster card anymore, right? It's kind of this whole premise of innovate or die. And to me, that's a lot about what the energy transition is. We could debate it. We had a little table conversation. Is it true? Is it real? Where do we think it's going? It's going forward. And as an industry, as companies, as a country, we have to keep making movement forward. And that's what we'll talk about a bit. So the energy transition is here, right? And the energy transition to date has been primarily driven based on government policy, consumer preference, and consumer sentiment. And it's starting to shift in terms of other drivers of it around as the price of renewable energy decreases, we're seeing more movement of that energy transition. But it's here. This image kind of shows that somebody's pulling it. We are pulling it in place. They are pulling it in place. And it's really all about reducing carbon emission, right? Greenhouse gases, carbons, with the goal, and are we going backwards? I don't see us going backwards. Will it temper and slow? Maybe. But, the UN, it's tied to the UN Sustainable Development Agreements, and then the Paris Agreement, right? So the UN, its nations, many countries and companies have agreed to goals of net zero targets by 2030 and by 2050. And the ship is marching on, or we are all marching on. why does this matter, right? So if you look at this, the industrial revolution drove energy consumption. So this graph is U.S. energy consumption since 1776, right? We went hundreds of years at a very low consumption rate. Consumption at that time was just was primarily biomass until innovations came along that drove and accelerated the consumption of energy, right? So if you think about your own life, so me personally, I can think about this. My grandparents lived in a small 2-bedroom house in Chicago. They only ever had one car. There was no air conditioning. They had one phone. It was connected to a wall with a cord. Used to be the dial. I loved that dial. In fact, I actually loved the fact that at one point it was only 5 digits, right? It was, you just dialed the last of the first 3 and then the 4, right? Their consumption needs were low. Their closets were small, and they weren't full. When I think about it, when my parents got married, right? So when they first got married, they had one car. And even when they moved to the suburbs, my dad, did carpooling. Eventually, they had 2 cars. As teenage drivers, my brothers and I shared a car. I shared a room with my sisters. Our footprint was very small. So, if you go back and you look, that was somewhere in the 1980s, 1970s, 1980s. We weren't consuming as much energy. Today, and maybe always, the American dream drives consumption. And it's not just the American dream. I'll show you a slide later that the global energy consumption parallels this, right? We're driving consumers, we're consuming goods, energy, things that require energy, that are contributing to greenhouse gases, that are contributing to carbon consumption. Our footprint, our demand for energy is dramatically different, light years away. And it is what it is, right? Not right nor wrong, it is where it is. When we look at this, and I think, a couple of things that we talk about is these waves of innovation, right? So the other thing that happened since 1776, we're living in the Industrial Revolution. The first wave of the Industrial Revolution was about basic manufacturing. It was water, the cotton mills, right? So a certain amount of energy consumption. Energy consumption started ticking up. The second wave, railways, steel, steam engines, sending people further afield, driving demand, driving innovation, and different ways to power this. Because remember, if we were relying on biomass wasn't enough to do the things that we needed it to do. The third wave, early 1900s, internal combustion engine, right? The automobile. And then we get to the fourth wave, which was started around the 1950s, aviation, petrochemicals, right? So through the third and the fourth wave was really where the energy industry, when we think about it from a oil perspective, when we think about electricity, electrification came into play at first in the early 1900s. The fifth wave, they say, is really around digitization, and that's where we're at the moment, and where we're moving into is the sixth wave of innovation. What's really interesting with this is, I think, when we look at it, these cycles of innovation are increasing, right, and accelerating. So while that first wave lasted about 60 years, the fifth wave that we're kind of on the tail end of was only about 30 years. Innovation is going faster and faster and faster, right? And with that innovation comes power and energy and other consumptions. And if you look at it globally, you see that this transition goes along with it, right? So biomass to oil to coal to natural gas, nuclear. Nuclear had its heyday, but I think the heyday is coming again, would be my guess, right? I think it's, in my opinion, maybe the most likely fuel source of the future that to give us the energy demands that we need. Because of course, the renewables, the challenge with renewables is the wind is not always reliable, right? Ask the folks in the UK last summer when the wind in the North Sea was not blowing very much, how they can rely on that. And the cost of renewables is challenging, right? And in fact, I was at a session recently with some folks from Bloomberg NEF, and fundamentally, you know, their view is this is happening, and the only way it's economical is with government subsidies. And so that's what we see happening. So, you know, that's one of the questions people ask me, is it really economical? I don't know. It doesn't seem to be. We, you know, a few years ago, my husband and I, he loves the idea of solar. His parents had solar panels 30 years ago until they stopped working, like, you know, 3 years later or whatever that happens. But we priced out what it would cost to put solar on our house. The payoff was going to be in about 40 years. And on our daily basis, our energy consumption or any price was not much better. We still needed, you know, a connection to the electrical grid to consume energy, maybe to give it back. It's a dilemma, and it's a dilemma I think that companies and individuals and countries are wrestling with, and so we're going to be seeing more of that. But we recognize that this is an acceleration in that. When I think about what does that mean for the downstream, right? And I've always been downstream centric, working in chemicals primarily, a little bit in trading and refining. You know, humans, when we think about us as individuals, we are dependent on the downstream, right? So from the chairs that you're sitting on, to your phones, to your cars, to everything, we are downstream dependent. We like our consumables, right? I talked about how my grandparents had very small closets and very small houses. My house is probably 4 times the size. My closet is full. I don't know about you guys. The garages are full. We have a lot of stuff. And that stuff is all coming from downstream energy, right? Whether it be plastics, whether it be surfactants to wash stuff, whether it be textiles. Most of the textiles we wear today are synthetic, having a carbon derivative of some variety. So to get to where we are, you know, kind of the then and now, as we get here, as a world, basically, we are dependent on the downstream. And the downstream has a really significant economic impact. So these are a couple of charts from 2 different sources, and this is related really to refining and chemicals. So the information on the left is from AFPM, so it pulls in a bit more of the refining aspect. The information on the right is from American Chemistry Council. In the US, these are US numbers, 3 million jobs are supported by the US refining and petrochemical industry. Now, that's not how many people are working inside of a petrochemical company or an energy company, because what we know is that for every job at, let's just say at a manufacturing site, a chemical site or oil refinery, 7 jobs are created in the community to support that. Whether that be school teachers, restaurants, any of the array of services that support both the site and support the individuals. Huge impact. Our economy is dependent on the downstream, not just for the goods that we want to consume, but also for the economic impact that it provides. But kind of so what? That was then, right? That's that point up until now, up until today. And what does it really mean? So I think one of the great challenges, and the challenge that a lot of chemical companies and energy companies recognize, is this dependence is not going away. as individuals, we still want our stuff, right? And when you look at the developing world, everything about the energy transition also assumes that we allow the rest of the world to come up to a higher economic standard. And it needs to be done through cheap energy, cheap consumables, the ability for the middle class to grow. So that dependence is not going away. But we do see, and what I see is that the downstream in this post-pandemic world, in this energy transition world, there's really 4 themes that are defining how the downstream is responding and taking action as it relates to the energy transition. So the first is repurpose. Since 1991, 90 refineries have shut down in the United States alone. Not really energy transition driven necessarily, right? We've seen some in the news recently. Some people in the group may have been impacted by it. These refineries are shutting down because of efficiency reasons. Some of them were really small. Some of them were really old. It was no longer efficient. They were no longer economical. Maybe there were some environmental issues that were too costly and hard to remediate. And as a industry and as operators, there's a lot more efficiency and orders of magnitude. What we've also seen is the demand for refined products is decreasing, right? Read any balance sheet from any of the refining companies, the demand is decreasing. So there's this negative cycle, right? So you think, well, it's shutting down. This is bad. It's bad for the local community. It's bad for the people that are involved. Maybe it's bad for me. And yet what the downstream is doing is recognizing that there's actually still needs for the products that are coming out of this. And so what we see happening is repurposing of assets, repurposing of sites. So recently, LyondellBasell here has announced that they're shutting down the Houston refinery. They've been trying for years, at least 5 years that I know of, to sell that site. Nobody wants to buy it. The refining industry is viewed a bit as a dog, right? So it's been hard to buy and sell refineries. Maybe not so hard to buy them because they're cheap, hard to sell them because they're cheap and nobody wants them. So LyondellBasell is shutting it down, but what we're seeing is, Lyondell, Marathon, Shell, they are converting these refineries that they're shutting down into alternative fuels, advanced recycling, right? So to fulfill more of the downstream petrochemical feedstocks, or renewable diesel. In fact, the Marathon refinery, their Dickinson refinery is converting to renewable diesel and is going to be powered by wind turbines, right? So they're going all in on this energy transition from that perspective. Again, innovator's dilemma. Even if it was successful, they have to look ahead and figure out how they're going to creatively destroy to keep moving. Investment. So, I asked the question earlier, do you think the energy transition is value creative? Yeah, it sure is, right? So in 2021, $755 billion of investment in the energy transition. And that cuts across a wide range of products. Per the IEA, that actually needs to quadruple, maybe quintuple, up to almost $4 billion in order to meet 2030 goals and even to meet 2050 goals. There is a lot of opportunity for investment and innovation in the industry. Last year there was about $2 billion in carbon capture projects. Already this year we're seeing a lot of, more than that announced in terms of investment, and about $500 billion in hydrogen projects around the globe. And we see that also here, right? I see a lot of this in the Houston area. Linde, Air Products, Air Liquide, everybody's announcing hydrogen projects. I think there was a few skeptics over at one of the tables about it, and yet the plan is there, it's being developed, there's investment happening in these areas. that relate to continuing to develop the downstream as well as the upstream energy. Innovation. So when we want to keep using our plastics, washing our clothes, driving our cars, in an energy transition world, there is a lot of innovation needed, and that's where there's a huge focus in the downstream, right? So alternative feedstocks, whether it be biomass, whether it be through advanced recycling, a huge investment and effort going into innovation, right? To figure out how to solve and create opportunity that the energy transition and adapting to that change, right? Process decarbonization. You know, carbon is the bad actor here when we talk about what's going on from an energy transition and a greenhouse gas perspective. So lots of innovation around process decarbonization, whether it be energy efficiency, whether it be around how the feedstock energy is coming in, significant investment in time and effort and energy and innovation spent. Resource stewardship, which gets around the recycling, and then of course digital. Digital transformation and the use of digital tools to figure out how to decarbonize, to how to replace some of these products, how to get better feedstocks, how to move this forward. And what I think is really interesting here, and I was at an event last week and we were talking about this, whoever they are, right? But at this point, only 50% of the technologies that we need for the energy transition and to support the downstream through the energy transition have yet been identified, right? 50%. There is a lot more innovation that needs to happen. And a lot of focus by it. And what I think is really interesting, and I'm seeing a lot more of this, and maybe you are too, is that the innovation in many cases is happening in small companies. And then we're seeing big partnerships. So surfactants being one of the areas I do a lot of work in with clients. And there is a huge array of partnerships from major producers that have been in the market, Sasol's, BASFs, and others, partnering with small innovative companies that are developing biosurfactants because they can get it faster, they can work through these development cycles, trial it, get it to market, and then help pull through and draw that innovation. So we're seeing a lot of that. That's really driving it. And then employment. And employment's been interesting, I think, the last couple of years, partly COVID related. But I think one of the things when I talk with folks, it's like, well, am I actually going to have a job anymore, right? So I asked early on, are you worried about your career? This group is not overly worried, right? It was kind of at the midpoint. But a lot of people are really worried. What does this mean for me? At the end of the day, let's be honest, we're all a little bit egocentric. What does this energy transition mean to me? How is my job going to be affected? How are my kids' futures going to be affected? And what it looks like, and you know, this is a graphic that represents the energy employment shift through 2030. Significant job creation. A little bit of job depletion, right? Especially when you look in areas like coal and oil and gas. We've certainly seen it in oil and gas, although that seems to be tempered based on where we are today from that perspective, just the market dynamics, but significant acceleration in employment for innovation, end-use renewables, bioenergy, cars. We haven't talked a lot about, you know, the electrification of vehicles, which is interesting because it's driving not just kind of the shift of the fuel source needed, right? So there's a bit of a conundrum there when you think about, well, how is this electrification going to be powered? How are my cars really going to be powered? But also, I was at hosting an event a couple weeks ago with a person from GM, and we were talking about this in another major chemical company and the amount of innovation to adjust the materials needed in vehicles for electric vehicles, right? So different temperature profiles, than what an internal combustion engine has, other things. So it's driving employment, it's driving innovation, it's driving change. In some ways, I almost would say it's driving job security. Maybe not the same job, right? So there's reskilling, retooling, new creation of different areas of focus. But employment and job skilling is here to stay. And then impact. I mean, I think at the end of the day, when companies are looking at this, they're looking at what's the impact, right? So we know the energy transition is happening. There's huge investments. It is a significant change. We're in a bit of an era that Clayton Christensen, if he was alive, would say, you know, it's the innovator's dilemma. We have to innovate, we have to change, we have to do it before it's done to us. And I think we are. We're at the beginning of a new era for energy and chemicals and the downstream value chain. And that's it. Thank you. All right, questions, if we can, our mic working. I feel like we flew through it fast, and I didn't get to move the way I like to move. Or shout it out, and I'll repeat it. Oh, good.
Victoria Meyer, thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
So from a standpoint of when we talk about efficiency, and efficiency was the largest percent increase on the most recent slides for John.
Yep.
Can you give some examples of efficiency that could apply to us in the Houston area as chemical engineers?
You're going to make me go look at that efficiency slide. You know, so efficiency, what's interesting to me is I think of the energy and downstream industry actually as there's elements of inherent efficiency already, right? So there is a circularity, there's a sustainability, there's an efficiency, and it's done because at some point somebody sees a waste stream and they're like, well, we shouldn't be wasting it. What can we do with it? How do we use it for something else? In this instance, the efficiency, I think, is, you know, for us, it's back to that. How do we do more with less? I think the efficiency is also going to get tied with circularity, because it's an efficiency of carbon, maybe not necessarily an efficiency of power and energy per se, but where I see the impact on energy in the downstream is really this carbon central efficiency.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Julie. I'm Jack Chosnick.
Hey, Jack.
One of the interesting talks I heard during the Global Congress on Process Safety was from Honeywell, and this is related to energy and innovation. Since we're trying to define what generation comes after the last one, Z generation.
Yeah.
The next one is they made some futuristic assumptions of what's going to happen in terms of energy consumption. And they said that the next generation is already in place. They don't care so much about stuff. They care more about virtual things. And so the current generation is the stuff generation. We want to have cars, we want to have clothes, we want to have that. The other generation, they call them the Yoda generation. They don't care about that stuff, so if they don't care about that stuff, it's going to be less manufacturing. And less manufacturing, consumption. So they put two scenarios, and first of all, in both scenarios, you're never going to attain carbon goals that were there. But
Right.
what's your thoughts in terms of we're going this way or we're going this way?
I think that's a good point, and I think if you look at it's different. I think the consumption patterns are different, and there's not as much stuff. What there is that different dynamic. There's not as much movement, right? I have friends whose kids refuse to get driver's licenses. Well, why should I go anywhere, right? I connect with my friends online. I can game, I can play video games, I can connect, I can Snapchat, I can whatever, from wherever I am. I don't need to go there anymore. And so I think that's interesting. The other thing that we see, if you look at consumer trends with, let's say, the generation that's between 15 and 25, if we want to call it the Yodas, or maybe they're part Gen Z, is this aspect of clothing, right? Less new clothing purchase. I mean, they've gotten very sophisticated with used clothes. It's not just thrift stores, right? There's Poshmark. There's all these different businesses set up around sale and reuse of items. And I see that with my own kids. I have teenagers, and that's what they want to do. Well, let's go find a thrift store and go shop. I'm like, really? Like, okay. It's not necessarily cheaper, by the way. So, yeah, you pick. Thank you. I can comment. The cost is there. So what we see is the cost. We're in a dilemma. The dilemma is we recognize actually renewables today is far more expensive. End-of-life solutions have not yet been developed and secured. Batteries is a great example, right? So batteries are expensive, they're heavy, they're big, they don't last forever. Where are we going to go with all the batteries? We don't have a solution for it yet. And I think that's maybe, to me, maybe the most worrisome part. And I think this is also where the innovation is going to have to come in, because we can't actually afford to have a wasteland of batteries somewhere. We need to figure out how to reuse, repurpose, break them down, what have you. And also create some independence, right? So we talked about at dinner, the whole cost of energy, the energy transition. There's a little bit of a not in my backyard mentality, right? Well, if I stop producing oil, then I've done my part. Well, no, not if you're still buying it from somewhere else, right? If that's the bad actor, not if you're buying it from somewhere else. If the U.S. and Europe have regulations that make manufacturing and the cost of goods so cost prohibitive, and yet don't prevent areas where there is less awareness, where they're not necessarily following the same rules and regs as it relates to carbon reduction and greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore producing it more cheaply, do we become less competitive? What does it do for us? So I think there's still lots and lots and lots of work and battles still to be done. But the only way that you win the battle is if you're in it. We can't sit this one out. We have to be in it. We have to be driving it, because if you don't, you're just going to accept whatever the results are.
Thank you, Victoria.
You're welcome.
I want to say thank you so much.
Thank
Our speaker gift will be mailed to you, but temporarily I've given you a coffee cup.
I like coffee. I'm a coffee girl.
So, Victoria's next podcast will be on Tuesday.
Yeah.
How do we go about finding that podcast?
Okay. So it is called The Chemical Show, and it's on Apple, Spotify, et cetera. Is anybody here, are you guys podcast listeners? Do you guys know how to find a podcast? No. It's a legit question. Okay, so maybe the easiest thing, if you're not, go to Google. Are you guys Google users? All right. Google The Chemical Show podcast. The easiest way to listen to it might actually even just be from the website, thechemicalshow.com. And all the episodes are loaded there. if you get sophisticated, you can listen off your phone, whether it be an Apple Podcast or Spotify or any of the others. But you know, I'm biased, but I think it's pretty good.
Thank you. So, thank you, Victoria. I appreciate Victoria coming, and you know, Progressio Global is her firm, and I actually plan on giving you a call about my own business.
Good.
So thank you for
Let's do
that.
it.
So I usually don't give a shout out like that. You're
Well,
the only.
thank you. I
I'm
appreciate
I might get a phone call about that. I hope
All right.
not. But I do want to say thank you to everyone who came tonight. I know that there were so many functions going on this week during OTC, and we appreciate everyone's interest. It was nice to see new faces as well as some that are always coming to meetings. And again, our next event is the MV Sam Houston Port of Houston tour on June 3rd. And the website is up for registration. So thank you to Dennis for organizing that. And our next event is September 1st. And Victoria, you are always welcome to come to one of our meetings.
I will. I'll come back
Thank
and
you.
check it out.
Thank you.
This is great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.